morning to one and all here. I mean, great show outside, good crowd inside. That's the best way to start the day for me. And with G20 happening, you all will be having curiosity to understand the chemical regulations that are applicable or upcoming in the G20 countries. So I will take you through today those applicable regulations in those countries. And just to talk about myself, I'm Dr. Jayachandran Nair. I am CEO of GPC India. With that capacity, I stand in front of you to talk about the upcoming regulations in the G20 countries and which are already in place. And before I start on the exact topic of the day, would like to talk about global product compliance. We started off way back in 2008, and that's our strength. We have a long career in the field of chemical regulations. We have been across the globe. We represent more than 1,500 clients. And to serve these clients, we have a team of resources which accounts to 100 plus and with 8 offices across the globe. And we have a good client retention because that's very essential, because we are moving with the client to those countries. So we are basically a part of the client's management, if I say it not be incorrect. When we talk about the chemical regulations, obviously it comes across to the substances and the product portfolio that we have handled. We have handled more than 15,000 plus substances. And we have carried out more than 750 plus registrations in various countries. And equally are holding good number of consortia management. So, along with this also comes the requirement of the correct classification and labeling of your products. We authored good number of saved data sheets in multiple languages because the client basically wanted those things in the regions where they have their exports. That's the reason I first mentioned that we have moved along with our clients. We started in 2008 at a small entity with a small resources with us. Today we have moved wherever our clients went and expand our offices in 8 countries with a resource strength of 100 plus. So G20 is the event happening in the country. So let us talk about the regulatory requirements in the G20. But before we start, I'll just touch upon the overall chemical sales in these G20 countries. What is the volume? We talk about the G20 India presidency, and then we'll take you through the countries within G20 and what are the regulations that are upcoming and what that will be applicable to you or where you need to pay a bit attention towards. So the group of 20 countries, G20 is an intergovernmental forum, comprising of 20 countries, and India as well is one of that particular G20 group. If you look at the overall global GDP from the G20 countries accounts to around 85%. If you look around the global trade, G20 contributes to around 75% of the global trade. And if you look about the population as well, we are almost 2/3 when you talk about the G20. This implies how much it is important for a country, India, to be in that particular segment of the trade or the growth on the GDP, right? Therefore, this session is very important for all of you because we want to grow across the globe, also increase our own in-house competency towards various manufacturing and trade. Now, India is holding G20 and started from 1st of December and will be here until November 2023. And you all know the theme of G20 presidency is Vasudevaya Kutumbakam, implies one earth, one world, one family, right? So with that, I'll go to the exact topic of the day, and I'll just show you the sales of chemicals. And this is based upon the data of 2021. So it's an authentic information. If you look at it, the one in orange stands out almost 1,800 billion euros. Yeah? That is from China. And we just heard Mr. Ravi speaking about the way people are developing and things happening. If you look at the number 2, it's Europe. 27 countries in Europe collectively have a volume of around 600 billion euros, right? Now, where does India stand in this? We are at number 6 with 104 billion euros, right? It's a good number because the European countries with 27 of them contributing around 600, India all alone having almost 104 billion euro business. This is again the data of 2021. So this indicates how we need to develop ourselves with the upcoming regulations in the countries where we are going to increase our sales and business to meet those requirements upfront. Yeah? Therefore, we'll be talking today with this context, like, what is the chemical inventory status in these G20 countries? What are the adaptation to the various UN GHS that is in those countries? Whether the GHS and the labeling requirements are existing or not existing, yeah? Status of the national chemical regulations in those countries, authorities in charge of those chemical management in those countries, and equally the compliance requirement. So more or less, the entire session would be focusing and revolving around these 6 topics for ease of understanding of everybody. If anybody has a question, you can either stop in between or we can have it at the end of the session. All of you will be much aware about the European reach, right? Anybody who doesn't know about the European reach here? EU reach. Anybody not aware? All of you are aware, it seems, right? So that's a good sign. So for European market, if you're exporting more than 1 ton per annum, there is an obligation to carry out the registration in that country for a business to happen. There's a fundamental first step of the business to happen in that region, right? But then there was a scenario where you could do the pre-registration and then do the registration depending upon the tonnage band of your products placed in the European market. The requirement was for the European manufacturers and the European importers. But for the non-European entities, for business not to stop for them, the option of only representatives was opened. So those from India and not having an office in Europe availed the only representative option to comply with their regulatory requirements within Europe. And we have served large number of countries, 1,500 definitely speaks about these European reach compliances. Now with that deadline over, and 2018 was the last deadline for the lowest tonnage band. This does not mean there is nothing happening within European reach. If you want to export tomorrow to a European country, what you need to do is, and if it is exceeding more than 1 ton per annum, first you have to carry out the registration, subsequent to which you can continue your business after you get the registration number. There is a understanding that it's a one-time activity is done. Yes, it's more or less a one-time activity unless otherwise no additional testings or decision is been made by the European Chemical Agency for your registered substances. So in case such thing happens, the consortia or the lead registrant will come back to you and say there is an add-on test requirements which has to be adhered by each of the joint registrants. To talk on that in detail, tomorrow at 2 p.m. here the same hall, you'll be having Dipti Nagpal is very much present in this audience now. She'll be talking about the upcoming updates towards the European reach, in particular towards evaluation aspects. So all those who are here, please, if you attend tomorrow at 2 p.m., it will be good for all of you. There are a lot of financial implications also, which industries need to understand for the European business happening out there. So the next country we'll talk about is UK. Post the Brexit, you all know Brexit happened. Until then it was with the European country, right? So post Brexit, for the 1st of Jan 2021, it's a requirement as per the health and safety HSE of UK for each one of to have a compliance within the UK norms. So all the countries within Great Britain, with England, Wales and Scotland, they need to have the UK reach compliance to be adhered to for business to happen in that country. However, the North Ireland part is still following the European reach adaptation. So this is something which all of you need to understand if you're having any business towards the UK market. So what is the option there? That and the threshold. The threshold is if you're exceeding 1 ton per annum, again in line to the European reach, you have to carry out the compliance requirement. How the compliance requirement is done? There are 2 options in that. One is DUIN. DUIN is downstream users import notification. And second one is new registration of existing substance, NRES. Why these 2 options? Because for those who have already done the registration within the European reach and having a business with the UK, and if they have done any business in the year 2019-2020, in that scenario, they are eligible to go with the DUIN's notification. Once you do the DUIN notification, you can continue a business and you need to do the registration depending upon a tonnage band which you are exporting to UK and in the time mentioned out there. So it is 2 years, 4 years or 6 years scenario. So actually the 2-year would end in this October 2023. And the next was 2025 and then 2027. But HSE has indicated there will be an extension towards this particular deadlines by an add-on 3 years. So the one which was supposed to be 2023 October will now be 2025 October. Yeah, so 3 years has been given as add-on to each of those deadlines. That is something good for all of you to know. Again, for those substances which are not registered within the European reach and or it is the first time export happening to the United Kingdom, they have to follow the new registration of an exist substance approach, and then you can do your business. Under the NRES option, what they will do, they will give you a registration number, okay? And that number is valid till you do the full registration. So it's a token number type of a thing. Why that is been given? To facilitate business. Again, why so? Because the lead registrant may not be having the requisite data with him to carry out the full registration. So until that is happening, no one's business should be affected. So if you do the NRES, you will be getting a number. With that number, you can continue business, and before the deadline, and when the letter of access cost is shared by the lead registrant, you can carry out your full registration, indicating you are a full complying with the UK requirements. So Russia is the next country we'll take in the G20, and Russia basically has, the Decree 299. That is, the chemicals in regulations are regulated by this particular decree in Russia. And the state registration certificate, SGR, need to be obtained for all the chemicals placed in the Russian market. The technical regulation on safety and chemical products, the TR, the Eurasian Economic Union, what they call it, 1041/2017 is under preparation. There has been some discussion on that. So one that comes into force within Eurasia, this particular compliance has to be, will be mandatory. But for now, they have got two inventories in that particular region. One is the National Registry of Potential Hazardous Chemical and Biological Substance. There is one set of inventory. Second inventory is the Unified List of Chemicals, what they call as TR041. So for any exports to Russia or for the into Eurasia, you need to check for these two aspects. You need to know whether your chemical substance fall in any of these lists or not. Within Eurasia, there was a window open for all of you to carry out the what you call to enable to them know that this is a new chemical or existing chemical. You can notify your things in that country. There's a process happening. Now it's stopped for some time. But still, if you have anything to contribute to add on to the list of the existing inventories, you can still do that. Now, second important part is once the inventory is there, once the regulation is going to come into force, how are you following the globally harmonized system, which is mainly the aspect for the chemical classification of the product, right? So when it comes to chemical classification of the product, as on today, Russia follows the GHS revision 4. The world is moving much ahead. There is GHS version 9 in market already. I mean, it has been published. But acceptance of these various revisions of GHS depends upon the country's framework and the model they are going to adapt. Now, Russia says they are ready to launch with the GHS version 7. It has come into force also for the 1st of Jan 2023. But still they are kept it voluntary as on date. Why? Because the key technical regulation on safety and chemical products is not finalized. So until that is not finalized, it's voluntary for you to follow GHS version 7, but you have to follow the GHS version 4 for sure. So next we'll talk on the much more need of the regulations, the Turkey regulation. I'm pretty sure many of you exhibiting here, those who are presenting here may be having some business or some exports with Turkey, and Turkey regulation is known as KKDIK. It's basically abbreviation of the Turkish language. I will not read that out here. It came into force in 2017, and there are deadlines for its registration. There are some differences between the European reach and the Turkish reach. Now, why I'm putting this comparison? For ease of your understanding. I saw no hands raised for nobody having exports to Europe, indicating all of you know the European reach. So with this comparative table, it will be easy for you to correlate what is that you need to do for the Turkish side of this compliance. So basically, there is a pre-registration window which has to be carried out for any business to do in Turkey before the deadline of registration closes. Yeah. So and there was that window has been still kept open by the Turkish authorities, but they call it now the late pre-registration, which is not officially informed, but they do accept the late pre-registration. Whereas in Europe, now there is no what you call pre-registration. The window is closed because the deadline is done with. By 2018, everything was closed. When there is inquiry option for submitting the things in Europe, and in KKDIK within Turkey reach, this inquiry option will come beyond the deadline of 31st December 2023. So I put in out there 1st Jan 2024. So as on today, there is no inquiry requirement because we are still within the timelines to meet the dossier submission. Registration of all substances is mandatory for those exceeding 1 ton per annum, which is common in both the countries. Polymers, if anybody into trading into polymer business, polymers are exempted in both the countries, but the monomers need to be registered. Data requirements, it is directly proportional to the number of tonnage band of yours. There are 3 tonnage band basically, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, more than 100, 100 to 1000 and above more than 1000. So as you go up in the tonnage band, the requirement of the data will be more. So we are mentioning here more data, it will be more volume and more data, which is applicable to both the segments. What is joint registration? You may not be a lead registrant for each of the chemical substance you are exporting. Therefore, there is an option of carrying out a joint submission. You share the cost with the lead registration, you buy those data and make a submission together. So that's known as a joint registration. For the R&D activities, there are exemptions. There is no exemption within, there is exemption for Turkey and for Europe as well. But for the safety data sheet, there is a difference in these two countries. Turkey says you have to get your safety data sheet prepared and compliant by an authorized person. Okay, that's very important. If I prepare a SDS of my own and submit to the Turkish authority, it will not be accepted. It has to be endorsed by an authorized SDS certifier who has taken the program and the course from Turkish government. That's very important. This is not required in the case of Europe. The basic differences. Now for dossier submission, in Turkey there is an expert to evaluate that. Whereas in Europe it is not, so it's ICA who does that normally. CSR requires the chemical safety requirement is of course there in both the regions. If I take about now Saudi Arabia, this is all part of the G20 countries, right? So we are touching upon those things. There is not much in action in Saudi Arabia regarding to chemical regulation. Does not mean there's nothing happening out there. Okay. So there is no chemical inventory per se for that matter as we have now in Europe. So no chemical inventory exists in Saudi Arabia. But what they have is they are following the Gulf Standardization Organization's norms. And the 8 countries in that, Saudi Arabia is one of the members in that GSO. So they have put their own norms and they are creating a system to have an overall inventory in the region. So indicating that these 8 countries within the GSO is going to come up with its own chemical inventory list, indicating there may be a time period when they'll open the window for each of us having business with Saudi Arabia to indicate them this particular chemical I am placing in your country, please put that as well in your list. So this is an opportunity for all those who are doing business with Saudi Arabia. Saying this, if you talk about the GHS, they have still not implemented that. But they do follow 3 main compliance systems. That is the GCC, which is a unified regulation for the control of hazardous chemicals. And they follow the GSO 1810 for the labeling. And they have got 2 systems for the SDS. One, they follow the 1104/2012 for the SDS format. And for the SDS content, they still follow the better one of ISO 1104/2009, indicating that they already aligned the system with the GHS requirements. Okay. So they are working in that line. So not much happening, but yes, things are moving around in Saudi Arabia. We go to China the next. In China, it's the MEE 12. That is this MEE Order 12, which is the key regulatory aspect that you need to observe and follow when you are having any business within China. China has got this inventory list. It's known as IECSC. And it's published by the MEE in 2013. There are a good number of substances already, almost 47,000 chemical substances are prevailing in the current inventory of these Chinese authorities. And for those substances not listed within the inventory, there is a process by which you have to carry out, and it will be called as the new chemical substances. So there is a registration requirement also for such activities. One thing which I overlooked to mention out here, that is the National Medicinal Product Act. That is the NMPA, what they call it. And this is mainly for all the raw material which are directly connected with the medicinal activities or for the cosmetic activity. So if you are having any what you call ingredient which go for cosmetic product manufacturing, NMP has to be abided with. There is a prescribed form to prescribed structure and the prescribed information that has to be filled in to comply with the NMPA requirement. When you apply for the NMPA, also they are going to check whether it's already in the China inventory list or not. If it is not there, a special approach has to be made for such activities. Let me make a quick comparison between the ME Order 12 and the European REACH for that matter. So, registration is required for those substances which are not listed in the inventory. That's number basic one clear, right? And all the non-Chinese companies can appoint an only representative for that matter to comply with the requirements of China. When it comes to the dossier and type of registrations, we have heard in Europe about the full registration, the intermediate registration, joint registration, right? But in China, it will be called as a record filling, simplified registrations, regular registrations, series registration, and joint registration. So some change in terminologies are existing in China, which is governed by the orders of ME Order 12 to meet the chemical regulatory requirements for the exports happening to the Chinese market. Of course, the data requirement, in Europe we have got the CIF, Substance Information Exchange Forum. But in China, it's not so, nothing exists, indicating that there is no compulsion towards the data sharing by anybody for that matter. Language, yes, Chinese language is mandatory, but they do accept reports submitted in English as well. Software, in Europe, we are following that using the Euclid, but in China, there is SCC, it's an online registration system for that matter, which enables one to make the submission to the Chinese authorities. We go to South Korea the next, and in South Korea, there is a deadline also approaching based upon the tonnage band, and it is known as the K-REACH in Korea, and it came into force in 2015. You see, every country is updating their activities. There is already an updation which took place for the existing K-REACH and which has been update on the 3rd of January 2023. But they are given a time period of 1 year for its implementation. So by the 4th of Jan 2024, the new update towards the K-REACH also will be applicable, indicating that those who are already into K-REACH services or K-REACH compliances need to keep a note of this particular activity. We will do a good comparison between K-REACH and the European REACH. Basically, there is a possibility still to do the pre-registration in Korea, which is not there now in Europe because the deadline is closed. In Korea as well, for the higher tonnage band, if you are exporting more than 1,000 tons per annum, that deadline is already gone. So for such a case, pre-registration is not possible. Okay, and for such a case, you have to first register and then do your business. There is another scenario which I mentioned in the 3rd or 4th line probably, known as the PEC, under the heading of registration. PEC is priority existing chemicals. For such a substance, which are almost 540 or so are in the list, for such substances, the deadline for registration is already gone, so you cannot do the pre-registration. So who can do still pre-registration? If the exports to China is less than 1,000 tons per annum, if the substance is not a PEC listed substance, you can still do a pre-registration in China and carry out your business and do the registration once the deadline for the specific tonnage band comes for you, right? So it's open a market. Here the option is for the inquiry route. Polymers are exempted for sure, but there are some conditions. There are some conditions for the exports to Korea. I think by mistake I mentioned China. It's Korea. Yeah, sorry. So for polymers are exempted, but then it's not that every polymer is exempted. We need to go as per the definition of all these polymers. There are PLCs are there, so that will be tested and subsequent reports need to be submitted to confirm that you fit in the particular exemption category for that polymer. Of course, Europe does not exempt, it exempts polymer, the monomers need to be registered there. So the joint registration option is open in Korea, and it is through SECO, what they call it, just like you have CEF in Europe. MSDS is again is different compared to the European requirement. In Korea, you need to follow the KOSHA system, okay? And in KOSHA system, we are following the SDS protocol. For a non-Korean entity, you have to appoint a only representative as well for preparing and submitting a SDS in lines with the KOSHA requirements. So this is something different. It's not applicable in any other countries. Of course, Turkey has an endorsement activity, should be prepared by a certified person in Turkey, but they don't say you need to appoint a only representative for that matter. But Korea says so. So you may have to have an only representative for the registration of your substances, and for the KOSHA, you need to reappoint that only representative once again for preparing and submitting the KOSHA-based safety data sheet. I go to Japan the next. In Japan, it's basically the Chemical Substance Control Law, CSCL, what they call it. They have an existing list and a new chemical list. For new substances that are not listed in the inventory, a strict pre-manufacturing evaluation process has been implemented. So Japan is very strong that way in terms of compliance, and they do have an internal system. And they do have the inventory list, And if you look at the inventory list, it is divided into two categories. Those which has been in place prior to 1973, almost 21,000 substances are already existing in that inventory list. And for under the new chemical substances so far, under the CSCL, they have almost 8,000 substances in place already, indicating that they are checking and understanding, updating their national inventory frequently. Now, who does the entire controlling of these activities in Japan? It's the manufacturers and importers required to notify the new chemical substances to the Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry. It's METI. Yeah? Like in Korea, it was the KRIS implement KK. In Turkey, we had the KKDIK. In Europe, we have the ICA. Here it's METI who controls the major cases, and the Ministry of Labor and Welfare, along with them, the Ministry of Environment. So, and at least, for the manufacturers, we have to give the notification for them 3 months in advance before you place your things in the Japan market. The most important country where we all are, and we heard Mr. Ravi also speaking about the India upcoming activities. So in India, the two main rules exist in terms of compliance requirement is the manufacture, storage, and import of hazardous chemicals. It is act as per this rule as per the 1989. This is prevailing. Also, what we have is the chemical accidents, that is the Emergency Planning and Preparedness and Response Act of 1996. These two are well established. Every manufacturer who are into the business of chemicals are judiciously following those things. But what is now coming up, and once it comes up, these two will be added into the ICMSR rules, the Indian Chemical Safety Management rules. So, once it comes in, what are the major obligations that you are supposed to follow? So, there will be 3 actionables from all the Indian entities for that matter. One is any chemical for that matter. It may be a raw material for the pesticides or a pharma or cosmetic, any chemical, if it is more than 1 ton per annum, invites compliance towards this notification. That's number 1. Second thing, for all the notified substances, at the end of the calendar year, it's before the 1st of March the next year, you are supposed to submit the actual business volumes of the previous calendar year, which will be called as the annual reporting. The third thing is, there is set of 748 or 749 substances already identified within the Schedule 2 of the 5th draft of ICMSR. Those 748 substances need to undergo registration. That's mandatory. We heard in the first session also, Mr. Ravi say, when it is going to come out is not certain. Yes, I do agree with what he says. But I always say to all my people I talk to, that whatever time you get now is an add-on time. because the information that has to go into the notification dossier is much more than the regulation you saw about other countries. Here you are supposed to also provide the spectral analysis. I mean the complete fingerprinting of your chemicals. It has to be done using 5 to 6 instruments for that matter. And all of us may not be well equipped with the instruments, also with the availability of the lab in-house. So, and you'll be handling a large chemical portfolio for that matter, right? And those, when the order comes in, a rule comes into force, there will be a rush towards the existing laboratories as well. So this is the time all of you need to start understanding your substances, your portfolios, and initiate the testing so that you are well prepared once the rules comes into force. Once the rule comes into force, there will be 1 year transition period, and then a window will be open for the notification for the first 6 months. And after the 6 months, the window is closed, and any substances which you are placing in the market beyond the initial notification window period will be called as a new chemical substance. We now go to the Latin American countries. We'll touch upon 3 among them. We'll talk about Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. And it will be good if I just brief about these in general. But just to start with, the GHS, the last one in the line, the GHS, the 5th version is being adapted in all these countries, in Argentina, in Brazil, and in Mexico. If I look at the status of inventory, the chemical inventory, no approved national chemical inventory exists in Argentina. But in Brazil, it's approved, but still not into force. And if you go to Mexico, the national inventory of chemical substances is in place from 2009 onwards. Yeah? And a national registry may be established according to the general law for the integral management of chemical substances in Mexico. So these countries are also developing their system to bring up with something known as the chemical inventory. Now, which chemical and what is the name of the rule? In Argentina, it will be known as the National Law for Chemicals Risk Management. In Brazil, it will be called as the draft chemical, it will be called as the bill under the consideration by the Commission of Constitution, Justice and Citizenship, CCJC. Something quite different, right, in Brazil. In Mexico, it will be the Integral Management of Chemical Substances rule. Status, in all these countries, the rule is still pending. If you go to North America, we'll touch upon USA and Canada. In USA, the Toxic Substance Control Act exists, and that was from 1976, but it has been updated in 2016 following the Frank-Luttenberg Chemical Safety Act. And now it will be known as either the new TSCA or they call it the LSCA. So all of us prefer to know it as the new TSCA, but the other name is LSCA. So when you're having any business exports to US, you're supposed to check whether your substance is active still in this new TSCA or the LSCA list or not for that matter. And for not, you need to do a pre-manufacturing notice that is mandatory. You are supposed to inform to the authorities what all things you are going to do, how much volume, and also your interest and intention to do the business within the US market for that matter. Canada has the CEPA Act, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act of 1999. And Canada has accepted the revised edition, the 7th of GHS for the SDS aspect. And the inventory exists there. You all know it. It's the domestic substance list and the non-domestic substance list. If it is in DSL, it's fine. But if it is not in DSL, if it happens to be NDSL, then there are some actionables that you're supposed to take. You have to notify the Canadian authorities regarding your product and its volumes and its quality for that matter, so that they're convinced, and they may then try to put it across into the DSL list. We go to South Africa now. There are several regulations currently in South Africa. The major one is the legal framework for regulating chemicals are the Hazardous Substance Act of 1973, the Occupational Health and Safety Act of 1993, and certain chemicals are also regulated by the National Environmental Management Act of 1998. GHS version 8 has been in law in South Africa via the law of regulation of hazardous chemical agents, so that they are put into force. And at the moment, GS adopted by South Africa on a voluntary basis, but from 20th September 2023, all labeling and safety data sheet must be GHS compliant. So we say that we are exporting to the developing countries, so no worries, anything can go is fine, but it's not so. They are strongly going to implement the GHS version 8 for the SDS for that matter, and we have to strictly follow the current existing chemical rules in South Africa. We go to Australia, and Australia has the Industrial Act of 2019. We have to, and they have got their Australian Industrial Chemical Introduction Scheme, which is much established in Australia. And the IC Act includes a requirement that makes, introducers responsible for the categorizing their introduction themselves based on the criteria given by the AICS. So a well-set norm is made there, and all the introducers need to do all the needful for that matter for the business happening in Australia. They have got an inventory list for that matter, so you need to check in that. And other responsibility in Australia is you are supposed to make an annual declaration. It must be submitted by 30th of every November for the period of 1st July to 31st August of the previous registration year. So that is the basic requirement in Australia. And I think we've got 2 more slides to go, and the next one is from Indonesia. Indonesia does not have any approved national chemical inventory list. However, they have got B3, what they call it, It's basically the hazardous and toxic substance management, regulated hazardous and toxic, it's basically the hazardous and toxic substance management rules, and they call it B3 because it's their own Indonesian language. I will not pronounce those alphabets here, but then B3, if you're following, indicates you're handling a hazardous substance for that matter. Indonesia implemented the second revised version of the GHS, and in 2010. So we have to follow the GHS version 2 in Indonesia. In Indonesia, the chemicals are mainly controlled by the government regulation number 74 2001 on the hazardous and toxic substance management under the various laws of it. So not much, but yes, there is a GHS version 2 in Indonesia which you have to follow by. Now we only talked about the G20 countries, right? But what is the scenario globally? Globally, if you look at it, almost 45 plus countries, all those marked green out here, has some or the other regulations either in the draft form or this form of implementation. This indicates a lot to us for the country like India, where today we are at number 6 and we want to grow up the ladder, right? And we are also number 5 in terms of GDP. So for us to reach those places, we need to have the understanding of all the regulatory requirements coming up in these countries as well. It's not easy to keep a track of all those things for each one of us, but then we can let you know that if you can just log into this portal of gpcdateway.com, we provide all the information what I'm speaking out here on this particular site. It's absolutely free of cost. This is what GPC does. We are interested in creating the awareness of various regulations coming across the globe. Once you are aware, you are pretty sure you will take care of your needs for that matter, right? And in this portal, you will find all information of the countries you spoke, maybe a bit more than that. So you may get around 50 plus countries information in that particular, for that matter. And we also come out with various updates for that matter, yeah? It's quite simple and it's free of cost. Let me also bring out here, GPC is strongly supporting a new non-profit organization known as RRMA. RRMA stands for Regulatory Managers Representative Associations. Now what is that? You all are having regulatory requirements in your company, but you do not know where to go and where to learn. Either you contact consultants like us for your product requirements, but that platform is going something which will help the industry per se, and also, to best of my knowledge, RRMA is going to come out with various certification programs to have persons having a certificate course within the regulatory requirements of various countries. So it will be good if any one of you who are here are interested to have an understanding of RRMA. Today we are also helping them to exhibit at the GPC's booth at C26. So any of you may please visit there as well in case you have anything to know about the RRMA aspect. On the discussion that we had, any questions to me, I will try to answer the best I can at this moment. Otherwise, you can always write back to us. Thank you so much.
Does the GPC provide the SDS certification?
Yes, sir, we do
flagship?
author. We have done quite number of SDS authorization. Also, we help to have the extended ESG is what they call it. So we do help, sir. Like, but you may express which country you also want it for. We can talk to you, sir. Maybe we are booth C26.
Are these regulations are binding on manufacturer or as well as merchant exporter also?
Very good question, sir. In all these countries, the regulation is for the manufacturers and the importers. Many of the countries even do not have the terminology of a trader or a merchant trader for that matter. So it's the manufacturers and the importers. So I understand you are saying that you are exporting from here to other countries as a trader, but then you cannot do that compliance by yourself. So, and you cannot even appoint an only representative. So the option for you would be that you set up in those countries, act as an importer from that region, and then you can appoint consultants to support you technically. So there is no terminology exists for traders or merchant traders in the entire chain of these regulations, because they say it's the responsibility of the manufacturers and of the importers. But all the importers in India also who are trading in India, when the Indian rules comes into force, you need to also understand the entire supply chain, because the merchant traders or traders, they buy multiple things, right? I mean, I'm seeing good exhibitors here who are into trade. So they buy a lot of things from different countries, and the number of portfolios is wide range, huge. So they need to know what is the implication of them for such importation they do into India to comply with the ICMSR requirement.